These are the plaintiffs, Alicia and Simon. Alicia says she and Simon rented the defendant's farmland for the season to grow carrots, scallions, garlic, and other vegetables to sell at the local farmer's market. Unfortunately, they didn't get along with the defendant. And when they got out of their lease, he hijacked their entire season's crops. This is unacceptable behavior. It's out-and-out stealing so he can make a profit on their hard work, and they're suing him for the $5,000 they're now out. This is the defendant, David Brown. He says the plaintiffs terminated the land lease early and they vacated the land. As far as him stealing their crops, that's laughable. They failed miserably at growing anything to sell. He owes them nothing and feels the judge will concur. He's accused of a produce problem. The defendant has filed a countersuit for $5,000 for unpaid rent.
All parties, please use your right hand. Be seated. Come to order, please. Litigants have been sworn, Your Honor.
Okay. Alicia and Simon, you are suing Hay House Farm, represented here by David Brown. You're the owner? Okay, for $5,000 in lost wages for crops. You are counterclaiming against them for rent because they breached the rental agreement. All right, you folks go first. Talk to me. What happened?
Basically, March 15th, 2016, we rented David Brown's farm so that we can have our family start and grow our season's crops. During that time...
Had you been farmers before this?
No, I'm retired from the Coast Guard prior to this, so this is our second career.
Okay.
So we basically took
What were you planting?
We had everything organic from cucumbers, squash, lettuce, kale.
And were you growing it for profit? Like
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you would actually go to where farmers markets and...
We had 3 farmers markets and a farm stand that was on the property that we had access to use.
Okay, so what happens?
The time that we spent growing everything, he had made it clear at the very beginning that he had no intention on farming anymore. He wanted to retire and focus on his art, and that was fine by us. Unfortunately, he was like not willing to let go of control of the farm. He wanted to micromanage every minute detail.
How so?
For instance, chickens. He had chickens that we, within the lease, were allowed to raise and sell the eggs, as long as we gave him 1 dozen eggs a week. And he wanted us to feed them 4 times a day. Being novice farmers, in the beginning, we took his, expertise of 30 years of organic farming as, the way to do it. Mm-hmm. And at the end, we figured out you only need to feed chickens once a day. This was an operation with just myself and my husband with 4 kids living away from our home in our vacation camper on his property for a season.
How old are the kids?
At the time, Anna was 2 months old, Makai was 2, and then our 2 oldest were 10 and 13.
Who was taking care of them and the 10 and 13-year-old?
No, the 10 and 13-year-old would basically be free to hang out around the property, and I would have the baby with me as I farmed, including all the way from greenhouse work to harvesting. When I went to farmers markets,
How long were you
they had
farming?
with me. Basically from March until we terminated the lease in August, but we continued after that.
Okay, so why did you terminate the lease? How long was your lease for?
Until November, with an option to rent in December for an additional $1,000.
Okay, and so why did you terminate the lease early?
Basically, because of the back and forth with the micromanaging, we just said, we're not getting along like that.
Right, but you have to have legal grounds to break a lease.
Well, we actually asked him. We asked him to we would give him in exchange for letting us out of the lease early, his market spot that he had that we paid for the season. So we paid for the market spot he normally maintained.
Which he normally sells flowers there, so.
Right.
And he sent us this whole list via email. And,
What whole list?
His stipulations
May I see that?
he would be willing to let go of the lease. It's the second page.
Thank you.
You cede to me your Chester Market spot for the remainder of the year beginning with the August 7th market at no cost to me, you do not remove any more compost or earth material from the farm. You may come to the farm to take care of your vegetable beds and remove vegetable produce from the field only on 2 afternoons per week. That all of the property of yours shall be removed from my property 6 p.m. August 6th. If you agree to the above and so signify by returning an email to that effect, and then comply exactly with what is stated here, I agree to forgo the additional rent you owe under the lease, meaning for after you leave. Okay, what's going on, Mr. Brown? Talk to me.
Yeah, from March, we had a contract. We gave them our spot at the market, which has been voted the best small farmers market in Connecticut, and we have the anchor spot.
Okay.
And they stopped going at one point.
Okay, but you're not their father telling
Right.
you about
No,
your
absolutely. I'm just
disappointment in
saying,
them. They're tenants who want to run it their way, even if it's run it to the ground, right? So long as they're not
Right.
hurting your property. So I'm reading an email that you sent them where you say if you do A, B, C, and D, then you can come and tend to your crops until you harvest them, right?
Yeah.
And did you do A, B, C, D, and E?
Yes, we did.
Okay. And what is the reason why, after telling them that, and then they move out based on it, and then they think they're going to have access to their crops, you turn around and then say, I changed my mind, after they move out in reliance on your promise that you wouldn't change it.
All
So what
right.
happened to change things?
They came up to me and said, and I was sitting there with the worker, and said, oh, by the way, can we continue to sell vegetables with you at the market? And I said, oh, I'd have to think about that. Doesn't sound like a good idea. And they said, and by the way, if we can only come a little bit, would you water our crops for us? And I said, no, I wouldn't promise to do that. And the next day I got an email saying, well, just to document, and I have the email, our conversation, you've agreed to do that. And I had a worker sitting next to me at the time. I showed him the email. He said, no, you didn't. I was right here. You said no and no.
So did you answer their email?
Yeah, at which point I wrote back to them and said, no, I don't think this is going to work. I was really afraid of them. They would scream at me. I became really empathetic for people in abusive situations, and I had witnesses to that. They would just scream and swear at me. And my lawyer said, don't even let them come back. You know, they're being so awful. And I also started to realize they were stealing a lot of stuff.
Okay, tell me about that.
Yeah, they took 2 truckloads of our compost. When I saw them doing the first truckload, I went up to him with the helper and said, what are you doing? He started yelling at me. I'm not talking to you. You know, ask Alicia.
Why wouldn't you talk to him?
I did talk to him.
He says that you yelled,
I
I'm
told
not
him-
talking to you.
No,
Did
I
that
said,
happen?
no, he said, you're taking the compost off the property. I said, I'm not. I'm not taking compost.
What were
I
you
never
doing
left-
with the compost?
I was moving the compost from one area to the greenhouse. I never took his compost. Not
And
off the
according to
property.
you, he took it and took it where?
He did, and he didn't say that to me. He just yelled at me and said, I'm not talking to you, talk to Alicia. And
And this was what day?
probably July.
July.
Yeah.
Your agreement with them on what to do
July.
was August 5th. So that predates your agreement with them on what to do.
Right, but I'm saying, and then they took another truckload.
All right, let's talk about the doctrine of emblements. All right, am I pronouncing it correctly?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Emblements. They talk about that a lot in the Coast Guard?
No. I
Yes,
had
they
to
don't
do
talk about that a lot
some
in Miami
research.
either. All right, let me hear from you.
The doctrine of emblems is basically a safeguard for farmers who are leasing land so that someone can't just all of a sudden say, you don't have access, but you put all your seeds and work into the ground. You still should be able to at least harvest it. When we left on the agreement that we were going to have 2 days a week. If we had known that he did not intend on letting us back, we would have at least had a chance before we departed to take all of the crops. He tries to say later on that there was no value, but I documented everything on Instagram for advertising so I can prove when I had harvested. I have photos of things I posted.
And you have pictures of what you say are weeds.
Well, this is a before and after, if it makes any point.
What does before and after mean?
Meaning, because one of the other things he had been nagging us while we were farming was to weed and to mow, and we agreed to doing those things, but he acts like it was already in usable rows.
But I'm looking at what? What am I looking at, honey? Honestly, I have no idea what a vegetable looks like unless it's been sauteed and it's... All right, what am I looking at there?
This is over by his hay house, so over here we had rows of leeks. These beds are lettuce, and that's over at this
that was
point
no
in
longer
the
being
season.
grown.
So yes, these are
Yeah.
weeds, these aren't your crops.
No, they are the crops, but those
But the
are,
lettuce have no value.
Yeah, that picture that has
Well-
no lettuce bolts at that time of year are lettuce bolts, so we were
Right.
done with
So
lettuce.
there's
growing
nothing
lettuce.
here that you're saying, oh, I lost this because there's no value to
All
this.
of these
These.
leeks won't be harvestable until basically the fall. You plant them early and you harvest them later.
So what happened to all those crops?
That's what, well, and then certain things like the leeks were, they were buried under weeds. The tomatoes were all on the ground. They had never been staked up, weren't very productive, and when you would pick one up, the slugs had eaten it, wasn't saleable. We would normally, I get through the fall doing a weekly farm stand on the property. And I brought my records from past years. We would normally make, I think it averaged out to 30.
What is this?
That was the compost pile when we filled it.
All right. Are you farming now? Are you elsewhere?
No, we're getting ready to move to our new farm.
Did you buy?
Yes,
God bless you. Where is it?
in Connecticut.
Connecticut. All right. Court is in recess.
All rise. Welcome back to the People's Court. Harvey Levin here. Okay, I got a question. Anybody have a garden? Yes. Oh, really? Growing vegetables in your garden better than buying them at the store? Yes or no?
Yes,
Why? I don't understand this. Why?
because I grew them myself.
But that doesn't, why does that make them better? I don't get it. I really don't get it.
I don't know. To me, it makes them better because I took the effort to make them. So, I took the effort to grow them.
Okay, anybody got an objective why it's better? Yeah. Why?
You're in control of the process. You can use quality soil, quality ingredients to make your own food.
Can I just, real quickly, what's quality soil? Like grade A manure?
Good turf, good mix.
Okay, got it. Going inside the courtroom.
Okay. Let's go over a couple things. First of all, I researched the doctrine of emblements, and the majority rule appears to be that when a tenant is the one who breaches, you've got a lot of nerve asking to continue to farm. Because you could sign a year lease, breach, and then say, oh, I get to continue farming until you can't do that. But emblements aside, we have another issue in this case that we need to address, and that's the emails. And you very clearly get an email on August 1st telling you, all right, I promised you XYZ, and then he kind of didn't like it. He felt like, yeah, I said this, and then I get an email 2 days after they move out saying, oh, and we also want you watering our stuff, and he said, you know what, never mind my promise. All right, do you get a right to come to court and sue him based on that promise? And the answer is only if you can show what we call in the law detrimental reliance on the promise. And the only way if I say I'm going to give you $1 million and then I don't, you can't take me to court and say, she promised me $1 million unless you detrimentally relied on me telling you that. If you went out and you bought, a plane and, you did a bunch of other stuff and you altered your life and then it turns out you detrimentally relied. What's your detrimental reliance? There isn't any. You were moving anyway. So I find on your lawsuit, by the way, what happened to the crops? They're just gone? Did you harvest anything?
There was almost nothing.
All right. Based on what I have read, I find as follows. On your claim against Mr. Brown, I find for Mr. Brown because the doctrine of emblements doesn't help you since you are the breachers and the emails do not prove that you detrimentally relied on his promise. And on your counterclaim against them, you actually tell them, I'm not going to sue you for the rest of the lease. And now you are, but you can't do that. You did tell them you weren't going to sue them for the rest of the lease. And to tell them, now I'm going to sue you because you're suing me because I preferred to have just been able to keep you off my property and I'm going to charge you. I've told you you can't go on my property, but I'm going to charge you the rent anyway because you can't do that either. So on your counterclaim against them, also 0. And I wish you all luck, and I wish you luck on your new farm.
All right, both sides, hold on right there, please.
So after filing 2 competing $5,000 lawsuits against each other, the case ends up to be a nothing-nothing tie, so no one gets anything. I think she was impressed with you, no question, with your story, but you just didn't have the ammunition to prevail. You know, it's interesting. It does sound like you know a good bit about what you're doing, farming. You're going to keep farming? You have your own farm now?
Absolutely.
And keep this up?
All the way.
Going to make a career of this, maybe?
This is where it's at.
Thank you very much. Sorry you didn't win, okay? You must sign some documents. Now David Brown's on his way out of the courtroom. Mr. Brown, sorry for you. You didn't win $5,000 either, but you've been through a court trial. What do you think? How do you feel?
It was interesting. It's the first time I've done something
Yep.
like that.
All right. Good enough. Thank you very much. Okay? You must sign a few documents. Harvey, what do you think?
So, Doug, let me explain what the judge is saying. If you promise somebody something, but they don't offer you anything back in return, it's not an enforceable deal. And unless the person you promise relies on that promise and actually changes what they do normally because of it, it's just not enforceable. That will do it for this case. Litigants for the next case on the way into the courtroom right now.